Okay, let's get into some of these thoughts that have come to mind. I've not really had time to think these through, so they're going to be rather raw, but I suppose to go into them further, I should probably set up a little bit of context first. Hi, if you don't know me, I'm a writer focusing heavily on anime and manga. Right now, of course, I don't have any drawing capacity, so a lot of my stories are going to be told through novelizations. I use that term somewhat loosely, just more so written word over anything else, and of course through other forms of media such as mixed media programs like I do here on YouTube. Of course, I'm also a highly competitive individual, and most of my time I spend competing with other people and other things, and especially when it comes to writing, that's one of the things I try to compete with the most, to not just be good, not just even be the best, but to go beyond the best, to be the best of the best, to by no shorter of extent be the top of the top, be the cream de la crop, if you would. That's just my own personal philosophy. I don't think you should do something if you're not aiming to be the best at it, and I don't think necessarily that there's much point in really just trying to do a mediocre job or even necessarily just a good job if you're not at least trying to compete and push things forward and at bare minimum try to do better than you did last time. So of course, with this highly competitive mindset, I've always been thinking about ways to compete with other writers and other creators in order to just have a better time in general and just do what I truly want to do when it comes to artistic endeavors, which is to pin my works against other people's works. And I've thought of a handful of different ways to go about doing that. Direct competition is the main way I've thought about doing it, either under time limits or certain parameters. None of them truly can hold as much weight as some of these ideas I've been thinking of right now, and those are, of course, also very hard to implement. You have to get other people to do this sort of challenging thing with you and actually take the competition somewhat seriously. So I've always been one to want to create a lot of stories, more so directly competitive stories, to pretty much directly go toe-to-toe with very specific series in mind. When I do eventually get over to Japan and I actually manage to start creating some manga, I do specifically want to make manga that can kind of fill in things I see as potential gaps in the marketplace, but also fill in certain areas that already might have a series or two in them, but maybe I feel a better job could be done, or even just a more popular or successful or just a better delivered series could be put into their place. So what I'm saying is there's an incentive for me to create stories that directly compete with other stories and kind of compete with them on a somewhat even playing field, especially in a magazine-esque environment where you will be competing with other stories on an even playing field. If you sign up for a shonen magazine, every other entry in that magazine is also going to be a shonen series, but more specifically than that, if you have a love comedy, there might be 2, 3, 4, 5 other love comedies in there that you have to compete with directly, and people have to actually vote on to see which one stays in the magazine and which one doesn't. So if you're not at least doing better in those other contemporary series, then you're going to end up in a somewhat bad place. So thinking about this a little bit more, this is kind of when this idea somewhat hit me. I do like pitting series against each other that are fairly similar from the outset. My Isekai series, I find, that has some similarities to My Hero Academia in its structure and in some of the themes and just general plot beats. So I have been spending a lot of time comparing and contrasting the two series and seeing ways where I can improve over the other one. And that's something I find very enjoyable to do, but I also think it pushes the work forward. But more than that, as more and more series kind of have similarities to other series I have seen, and competing with those series kind of gets more detailed, the idea has struck me that what if from the get-go I were to start off making series under certain parameters that could compete with other series completely directly. So what I'm saying is, I would, or anyone else could, take a series that's been created, look at it, understand what really makes it tick, understand like the core components of it, and then make their own story that is in line with the initial one, and see if they can make a better version, or at least a version that could beat out the original. To put it maybe into more of an example, like you could take any random buddy cop film and make your own buddy cop film, but that alone isn't really enough to have as direct of a comparison. Like an action-adventure series could be vastly different from any other action-adventure series. To more specifically look at the components that really make other stories good and meet them on that equal playing ground is more so what I'm looking for in this sort of scenario. For someone like me, that pretty much ends up equating itself to looking at a lot of the manga/anime I've completed, looking at the stories, breaking them down, and figuring out ways to make my own versions of similar-esque stories in order to compete directly with them. So I would look at pretty much, let's say, the top 10% of manga I've read, and start making my way through that listing and seeing if any stories immediately jump out at me, but if not, just taking one of them and breaking down what that story does to make it itself, to make it individual, to make the story more of an individual, to make it unique, to make it tick. The thing that story does that other stories don't do, take those elements and then use them in my own writing in order to tell a similar story that's geared up in the same way, so that there could be a fairly direct competition between the two works. In other terms, there's a lot of series and art pieces out there that are directly comparable to each other because of how similar they are. So the goal would be to make an incredibly similar story that anyone, without even knowing there's a connection between the two, would automatically want to compare the series anyway, and then somehow have your series come out on top over the 1 year. Let's say mimicking, maybe basing the rule set off of. Again, I'm thinking that rules could help this a lot, whether those rules be there's only certain things you can take from a story, or if you have to use this, and this from any given story, or what exactly those rule sets could be. I think rules could be important for this, or like at the very least some guidelines that could help drive creativity in a more advantageous direction and to a more competitive direction. I think all those could help quite a bit in this sort of idea chain, or this way of challenging stories directly. But more than that, I guess it also allows for kind of a self-imposed difficulty. You can, no matter where you are as a creator, you can always pick another series that's in your skill set. You can pick a series that you found to be fairly flat, maybe had an interesting idea or two, but the writing portion of it, or the art portion of it, or whatever you feel need to be worked up and be better. You can take that part, fix it up, take the couple unique ideas, and retell the narrative in a more engaging way, flesh it out a little bit, and then make something that is stronger than what was there before, improving and fortifying the artistic community which you're applying it to. I find this just to generally be an interesting and unique concept. I think I want to flesh out the idea a little bit more, and I think I might also want to maybe record a few videos of me just trying this, taking a couple stories and writing alternate versions, or versions, not versions even necessarily, just taking some of the core concepts and applying them to a different narrative entirely, and just duking it out, and me scoring each of them and seeing where my story might falter or where their story might succeed, so on and so forth, until there is either a crowned winner because it's obvious, or maybe just a good exercise to see where the differences might fall. I definitely would be interested in making a series like that. Could be time consuming, and I don't know how fruitful it would be, but it could be a fairly interesting endeavor, and this is definitely something I want to test out more and flesh out, and just see if I can somehow turn this concept, turn this raw idea into an actual legitimate competitive standpoint where people can directly compete with other stories without necessarily needing someone else to be in the same room as them to do it. Maybe a way to compete between time and space, between different generations, a way to compete with other people on their own playing field and see if you can beat them at what they're best at. At least that, to me, sounds like the most interesting way to live.